Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to Talent Optimization. Today we are talking with Erich Kurschat, specifically about leadership and how we help our managers to really become great leaders. And as we have this conversation, we're going to dig in a bit to how do we make really great connections and collaborations within the work? And sometimes it's talking about silly things like Santa Claus, right? So Erich is owner of Harmony Insights, and no, that is not a dating app for those of you listening going, wait, Harmony, no, it's not that one. So it's not a dating app. But Erich also runs something called HR Hot Seat, which is essentially a strategic mastermind for HR professionals. And Erich, I am thrilled that you are with us today.
I'm thrilled to be here. I was so eager and excited to be invited.
Well, thank you so much. So do you want to jump in at all the Santa Claus or HR Hot Seat or Harmony at all before we get started? Or do you just want to dive into our conversation?
Well, if I understand this correctly, we are going to be audio only for this conversation. So the Santa Claus reference is going to go over everyone's head until they see a recent picture of me and the pandemic beard that I have been working on over the course of the past year. It was something that was fun at first and just kind of turned into a thing. And now, for the life of me, I can't seem to get rid of it. And I have heard the Santa Claus reference a number of times.
I love it. And as we have our conversation about leadership and how we specifically, lead and create kind of leadership development programs for managers so we can best serve them, the pandemic has really thrown a monkey wrench into things. How have you been supporting your HR folks specifically through the pandemic?
That's a great question. And a lot of people, I think, want to see things as so different these days. We have to approach relationships entirely differently, and we have to communicate with one another differently. And from my perspective, and you may share this perspective to some extent, I see a lot of what we're struggling with now to be very consistent with what we struggled with pre-pandemic. Now the primary difference being that we are not face-to-face in a workplace, but we're face-to-face online or face-to-face in a Zoom call. We're voice-to-voice on a phone. And the same issues related to communication that we struggled with previously, I think we still struggle with, right? So to a certain extent, it's how has the pandemic impacted or affected some of this, but to some extent, it's also, what are those things that we should have been working on previously and may not have been that we need to certainly focus on going forward. So we're not only connecting meaningfully with each other while we are apart like this, but then when we do come back together, we are firing on all cylinders.
Absolutely. And that communication piece, right? Because that communication, it doesn't necessarily change, but it's been amplified because we're losing a piece that we had, which is in the same room with the energy in the same room. And now we're trying to get energy through Zoom or energy through without visuals, right? So yeah, I hear that completely. So I'm really curious, when we talk about communicating more productively with all stakeholders, how have you seen this stay the same through the pandemic? And how have you seen this change in meaningful ways?
So in terms of staying the same, the consistent issues that I was talking about before, I think we have this natural tendency to assume that other people prefer to communicate in the same ways that we do, that they have the same values and priorities and maybe even strengths in the workplace. And one of my favorite quotes ever, and I'm embarrassed that I forget who to attribute this to, said something along the lines of that we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And that is so foundational to the conversations that I tend to have with HR professionals and business leaders in general when we talk about In what ways do you prefer to communicate with others? And is your assumption that they want to communicate with you in the same way? That because you're focused on details, that they'll also be focused on details? Or because you appreciate the feelings and emotions behind things, that they also speak that language? And of course, the answer is no, that isn't always the case. Yet I think regardless of how old we are, how long we've been in the work that we're doing, what our tenure is with our organizations, the assumption that we make is, if I'm wired this way, that you must also be. And that presents challenges when we are face-to-face. Certainly, you throw in a pandemic and people aren't able to be face-to-face, and we're now on Zoom, and some people are turning off video cameras, so we're losing up to, I think it's 90% of the meaning of what we say through the nonverbal communication that's disappearing as the video is turned off. Now, suddenly, that challenge, to use a word that you used earlier, is amplified. And we have to figure out then, all right, if not everyone else values what we do, prioritizes what we do, communicates in the way that we do, what do we have to do to adapt to become more effective communicators, leaders, salespeople? Kind of fill in that blank.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And knowing specifically kind of what the natural behavioral strengths of another person are is super helpful. And sometimes we don't know that. So we're kind of guessing, saying, is this person extroverted or are they introverted, right? If they're extroverted, they may, like to talk through challenges. And if they're introverted, they may, want to think through challenges.
And, even before we get to other people, do we know ourselves? Do we know enough
Right.
about what we are bringing to a conversation or a project to contribute our greatest value? And honestly, we could park all day on that step one. First, to understand your own value and then articulate it, which is quite another beast.
Absolutely.
Once you nail those things, then you can get into the business of understanding, okay, if I tick this way, what makes other people tick? And that's where the magic really happens, because you're beginning to understand what constitutes meaningful, genuine rapport and connection with other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if somebody's interested in knowing specifically a little bit more about who they are and how they tick, Eric, I know you use, the DISC to do that. And we here at Elevated Talent use Predictive Index. So we'll have some information in the show notes specifically on that. But learning who we are, it changes so much, because it's like, oh, that's why I do that. And that's not good or bad. It's who I am naturally.
I've had people at some of my DISC workshops who are kind of bummed out. They see the results and they're like, oh, I was hoping I wasn't that style, or I was wishing that I was more of this. And I'm saying, no, hold on a minute. Let's pump the brakes for a bit. This isn't about good or bad, right or wrong. It's about embracing how you are wired, embracing your natural tendencies and preferred communication style, and learning how that can be advantageous to you, but also the ways in which it might get in your way at times. If you're not careful about how you are approaching conversations and relationships. So, I'm not the person who's going to show up and say, you need to be less of this and more of this, and let's change who you are at your core. I'm the person that's going to help you understand those things that come so naturally to you that are advantageous, and the ways in which they could get in your way if you're not intentional about what you bring to relationships and to the work that you do.
Absolutely. Because guess what? Every single one of us is created absolutely perfectly the way that we are. Where the issue comes in is we're not created perfectly for every single job.
Or every single relationship. I mean,
Right.
Think about close your eyes and picture yourself at the Thanksgiving Day table, for example, and look around at your closest family members and think, how many of those people do you feel a true connection with? Do you feel that you can just talk openly about anything and have it be a nice, healthy, productive conversation? My guess is it's not 100%. If it is, then fantastic. But hopefully each of us is surrounded by some number of people who challenge us to step outside of our comfort zones and to think about conflict in different ways, and to learn things about how we are naturally wired that will benefit us in the long term as we grow into becoming better leaders and managers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love the Thanksgiving table analogy, right? Because there's times, whether it's networking or it's a family event or it's whatever it is, right? that we have to communicate with others in specific situations, and sometimes it's not enjoyable. So what are some of those key things that we can do to make those things more enjoyable?
So I think a lot of this begins with opening up lines of communication. So if we're talking about the workplace in general, or we could talk about networking, well, what environment would you prefer? Where do you want to focus?
Yeah, let's focus in the workplace, because within the workplace, so often we have to have communications with individuals that drive us crazy. I tend to call these people, are you ready?
Yeah.
Small fry petty tyrants.
All right.
And the reason being is it makes me laugh, right? So if I get a phone call from somebody that's driving me crazy and I look at it and I say, oh, it's so-and-so, small fry petty tyrant, I am laughing when I pick up that phone.
Right.
Right. So for me, it's that, all right, I know the thought that I have impacts the feeling that I have, and that impacts the action that I take. Therefore, I'm going to think about that. So kind of circling back around to that workplace conversation, how do you think that, we can improve those communications and relationships, knowing, hey, we have to communicate with individuals at all different levels and very different than who we are?
So I see a few aspects of that process. I think number one, and I always start here, is knowing yourself. We've already mentioned that, doing the work to be introspective and to get a sense of who you are and how you're wired, what you value, what strengths you bring to relationships and the work that you do. If you skip that step and try to then first understand other people or to adapt to other people, I think you're going to be missing the most important component of this conversation, which is first understanding yourself and being confident in that value, right? So whether you're getting that awareness through DISC, predictive index, and there are a number of assessments out there, and there isn't one size fits all, as you well know, but there are various lenses through which we can see ourselves and come to learn about those preferences and strengths. So showing up self-aware is part one. I think part two then is opening up the lines of communication, preferably with people whom you trust in the workplace, whether it's someone you're reporting to, someone who reports to you, or even a colleague on the same level, to say, this is who I am. This is what I'm going to bring to this conversation, to the work that we're doing. What can I expect from you? What do you hope to expect from me? And really turn it into a dialogue. So part one is sort of this inner monologue about who I am and the thoughts that I'm choosing and being intentional about, as you articulated earlier. Two then kind of expands that monologue to become a dialogue where you're going back and forth with somebody else to say, I want this relationship, this conversation to be beneficial to both of us, certainly to you as I'm looking to serve you. What needs to happen for us to make that possible? This is what I value. I'm going to come at this very detail-oriented. Are you also detail-oriented? No, you're big picture focused. That is good for me to know. Because step three then is, once I understand myself and the other person, is to adapt when I'm given the opportunity. And this is not to squash your natural tendencies or to hide your natural strengths. It's to take advantage of those, but to recognize that me being detail-oriented is not going to serve me well in every situation. Or me being task-focused is not going to be beneficial to building genuine rapport with every person in the workplace. So what do I know about me and then come to know about you, so that in step three, I can adapt what comes naturally to me to speak your language and come to understand something about you, or vice versa, that allows a situation that could have been filled with conflict and tension and discord to suddenly become one where we're appreciating and embracing that we're simply bringing cognitive diversity to this discussion. We think about things differently. We talk about things differently. We problem solve differently. And it turns out that is going to be the thing that allows us to be most successful.
I love those 3 points that you just made, because as we execute strategies inside of our organizations to get our business results, we need all different kinds in order to execute those key things. So what you specifically just stated is, hey, I may be very, very detail oriented and you may be very big picture, right? Well, guess what? Individuals that are big picture don't often do implementation of details well, right? I tend to get things 80%, 90% of the way done, and then it sits there. So I know on my team, I need to bring in kind of my integrators and my implementers that are super detail focused to get those things done. And on the flip side, those individuals that are very detail focused sometimes can't see the big picture of where are we going. And that's where that team environment comes in to say, hey, who's going to lead the charge here? And who are the individuals that are going to get sure that it's done with all the I's dotted and the T's crossed? And we have to have both to be super, super successful. So thank you so much for outlining those kind of three areas for us.
I'll let you know, Tracy, there may be some people in your listening audience like me who struggle with control issues and want to be all things to all people. And in our work and in our businesses, really want to be the person that's crossing all T's and dotting all I's and doing the work ourselves. But life just becomes so much more vibrant and whatever adjective you want to use when you realize the power of delegating to folks with different strengths and differing motivations and differing comfort zones. And that thing that I do pretty well, but don't love is going to be a dream to somebody else who says, you know what, I was born to do this one thing. So thank you for giving it to me to do, because I'm going to be inspired by it in ways that will keep me happy in the workplace. Now, suddenly, I'm able to be so much more productive as an individual contributor myself because I'm surrounded by people who bring different interests and passions to the work that they do. And that diversity and that cognitive diversity is a big component of diversity. It really just makes work so much more enjoyable and workplace relationships so much more fulfilling than they could be otherwise.
Oh my gosh, Eric, you are so right with this. I was just having a conversation with one of my coordinators, and we're working through some policies for an organization. And I said, hey, can you just give me I just want 5 ideas for how do we incentivize individuals, essentially, not just monetary incentives. So she came back with, it was like a 15-page, like very, very detailed of all these things. And I'm going, this is great. And the president of this company has an attention span of a gnat. How do we ensure that, we can do the bullet points for him and then have this as that secondary? But oh my gosh, the ideas and the step-by-step, anyone could pick that up and implement it inside of an organization, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, I love that because there are a couple of components to what you just articulated. One is you sort of reinforce that how this coordinator has done things. It's a she, right? You mentioned?
Yes. Yeah.
That she feels proud of her work, that she feels that her natural way of solving this challenge is valuable and welcome in the organization. 2, that the person who is the intended audience may not share her perspective, may not share her communication style. So it's possible that jumping into stage 3, that adapting some part of it is going to allow that message to land more effectively. And I think what gets challenging about that process, that 3-step process, is quite often our initial response is, oh, this is never going to work. It's going to fall on deaf ears. It needs to be totally changed, which may be the case. But what's happened in giving that feedback is that the person has been devalued. What they feel that they bring, the natural strength that they bring to their work, has been devalued. And are they going to want to continue working for you or your organization going forward? Yeah. It could be a great fit in all other ways, but if they don't feel valued as a person, as a contributor, given what comes naturally to them, first and foremost, they are not going to take well to having to adapt and to adjust their approach to differing communication styles. So we have to first begin by honoring and valuing and celebrating the cognitive diversity that people are bringing to our relationships.
Absolutely. And as leaders, especially as managers, at times we have to play that kind of intermediary, correct? So that intermediary that essentially ensures, hey, this is amazing work. And when this lands, it's probably not going to land well. So how do we ensure that this work, which is incredibly valuable, but not quite the right packaging for this specific end user, how do we do an and both here so that we have an amazing product for this end user, and steps 2, 3, and 4, which will come down the line, but it's just not step 1, are already done,
And you're being intentional and specific about it with a particular audience in mind. That reminds me of, I think, a common misstep, which is the sort of feedback. I've heard it said that feedback tells you more about the person giving it than the person receiving it.
Yeah.
And I've heard people, I was at a conference once where a woman who was talking about giving feedback told an anecdotal story where someone she was working with was just too talkative. And the feedback she gave was that you're just too talkative, more or less. I'm paraphrasing, thinking that that person's energy would work against them in all situations. What she was really saying, and didn't realize that I think even in telling this anecdote, is what she was saying to that person is, you may be too talkative for me, for my preferences, for this relationship. But to shut that person down and shut down their energy in all scenarios is such a loss.
Right.
And so when it comes to giving that feedback, and I like that you were being so intentional about how you were giving it with a particular audience in mind, what we have to be careful of is not to imply that your way of doing things is going to be inappropriate in all situations, in all scenarios, and with all audiences. As though my own opinion, my own preference is a global one.
Absolutely.
That all people share. If I shut down your energy, then somebody else is going to be at a loss. You're going to be at a loss because it's something that comes so naturally to you. So I'm glad I'm standing because this stuff gets me all riled up.
I know. I love it. And so if you listen to our podcast, you'll notice in podcast number 15, I talked about what inspiration means. And I'm just going to repeat the definition of inspiration here because it so threads into our conversation. And then you can kind of go back to that episode to listen a little bit more as we go through those specific steps as how managers specifically inspire. But inspiration is to feel someone with the urge or ability to do or feel something, especially to do something creative.
I like that creative piece. Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So as leaders, our responsibility is to inspire our staff to essentially move forward and to create specific outcomes in line with what our job is. But that creativity is so incredibly important to doing that. And yes, there's times where, hey, you need to do X, Y, Z, and there's not a lot of creativity in a specific task. But overall, there's definitely ways to be creative in the work that we're doing and to be fulfilled in it.
I'll tell you, Tracy, I agree with all of that. That fulfillment piece is so important. But even before the creativity, over the course of the past year and the work that I've done, bringing people together, networking events, et cetera, we need to be inspired simply to show up and do the work that we've signed up for. Creativity sometimes feels like a luxury, but I think people have chosen, and I'm in front of a lot of HR professionals, they've chosen really difficult but vitally important work, as evidenced by the past 12 plus months.
Yeah.
And I've connected with any number of people who are showing up for that inspiration simply to keep going in the work that they've chosen, and to do the very sort of what's fundamentally required of them in their positions. And so I think that just underscores how important that inspiration ultimately is. People have their own motivations. You've heard it said that you can't motivate other people.
Right.
But I'm big on finding that inspiration wherever it may come from. It may come from a podcast conversation like this. It may come from putting on your headphones and going for a walk around your neighborhood. It could come from having a full-blown conversation with somebody who doesn't share a single political, ideal of yours, with whom you would anticipate such grand conflict. But instead, there's some nugget about that conversation, about who that person is, or about your walk through your neighborhood that encourages you to look differently at the work that you do and the relationships that you pursue. And I think that inspiration is one of the most valuable things that we can get from our coworkers and the work that we've signed up for.
Absolutely. So I'm super curious, how do you leverage the power of collaboration specifically? So you talked a lot about collaboration, within the workplace. I know that you do a lot of collaborative activities with HR professionals. Collaboration is so important to get those different ideas, to get the inspiration, the creativity, so we can implement those processes in sometimes some pretty tough situations.
I know you and I both share an interest in and perhaps passion for mastermind conversations. And mastermind style conversation is something that can be practiced internally to organizations and among teams. And so on occasion, I will facilitate conversations around how to form a mastermind group internally. But the goal of a mastermind group really is to bring a handful of people together who are similarly minded in some way or have similar objectives, but don't necessarily all approach problem solving the same way. Actually, ideally, they approach problem solving very differently. And with the goal of tackling a challenge, achieving a business goal, and doing so in a way that you may not have thought of otherwise, that may never have come to you had you remained twiddling your thumbs on your own in your office or in your home office these days. I remember a story told once by a client who said, they had a number of consultants who were trying to solve a challenge and they hit a roadblock. And it wasn't until they invited somebody into their quote unquote mastermind group, someone into their inner circle from the IT department, who said, I don't know the first thing about what you do as consultants, but if I were approaching this problem, this is how I would tackle it. And it was the exact solution that they had been looking for. But it wasn't until they sort of opened up their doors and said, let's have this be a more inclusive experience and invite in somebody who might have a different perspective on a challenge, that they were able to make headway.
I love it. And I think that that's such a strong nugget for our new managers and leaders in organizations, and even those of us who have been around for quite a long time, which is very specifically, we don't need to be the ones that know everything. We just need to be able to ask the really good questions and create the environment for that success to happen.
And if the term mastermind group is a little too formal for you, think of it as just a personal board of directors. Imagine if you had a handful of people that you could go to with your most pressing challenges and know that they trust you, you trust them, they want what's in your best interest, and they're willing to give you some honest feedback, regardless of how easy it may be or may not be to hear. Having a personal board of directors like that, which each one of us can put together, is invaluable. I forget who it was that said, the name will come to me, that we're the average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with. I would argue it's probably a much larger number than that. But if you go with 5, the point is still made that, are we intentional about those 5 people? When it comes to the collaboration that we do, are we just defaulting to the people who happen to be near us in proximity and kind of running with whatever they bring to those relationships? Or are we intentional to say, you know what, I want to grow to be a stronger manager or a stronger leader? Who should be in that inner circle from whom I can learn and really glean such value from our conversations that, ultimately I end up where I want to be, and being intentional about those relationships and the way in which we're collaborating with folks in that inner circle really can make all the difference.
Awesome. Such great advice. So I'm curious, Erich, we've talked about a number of different items with some amazing nuggets throughout our conversation today. What's one key takeaway for the HR professionals that are listening in?
Well, it's quasi-related to everything that we've discussed, but I think HR professionals, I hear department of one so often.
Yeah.
And sometimes even in a larger company, you can feel like a department of one, that you're kind of off on an island doing your own thing. And I think too many people take that on as is it a badge of honor? Is that the language that I'm looking for? Where it's like, I've tackled this on my own and I'm proud of what I've achieved. And you should be. But imagine, how much more rewarding work and life can be if you say, you know what, I could use some help. There's only so much that I can do on my own. I feel burnt out over the course of the past year because I've attempted so much on my own. What value could there be in collaborating with others, seeking out differences in perspective, in communication style, being intentional about our communication with one another, intentional about the professional networking that we do, and intentional about the advice that we seek in order to be, a more effective HR professional, manager, leader. And I think when we come off of autopilot and recognize that there may be more efficient and effective and fulfilling ways to do the work that we've always done, we look at the work that we do through that lens, suddenly a career that can feel tired, worn out, exhausting, unfulfilling, can feel as though somebody walked into the room and turned on a light.
Right.
And now suddenly, without changing positions, changing companies, changing industries, we are reinvigorated in the work that we do. And we want to come at it with this renewed energy that everybody is going to feel.
Yep, absolutely.
And once that happens, I feel like you're doing work that's worthwhile, fulfilling, meaningful. It doesn't matter to me what work you're doing. It could be HR, it could be something entirely different. Once you get to that point where you're getting so much meaning and fulfillment out of what you do, then suddenly it gives credence to that, what people say, love what you do and you'll never work a day in your life.
Right.
There are an unfortunate number of people who don't feel that that's possible. And for some people, it may not be possible. I want to be realistic about it. But if you're in a position and you have the luxury to really pursue work that you love, work that is truly meaningful to you, I'm not sure that there's anything that comes close to the sense of fulfillment and reward that may bring.
Great. Thank you so much for that tip. Now, we're going to flip it a minute here because we have a lot of executives that listen to our show as well. So I'm curious, what's that one takeaway for our CEOs or executives listening in today that they can implement in their organizations?
So I immediately go to empower and equip your people. And you hear that said a lot, that the people are going to make all of the difference. I'm sure you have a great product. I'm sure you have a great service, but it's the people that make that product, and it's the people who create that service. And those people are going to be inspired to do their best work in ways that are different than what inspires you as an executive, as a leader. So recognize that people are going to be inspired in different ways, and then make an effort to empower and equip them to do their best work in whatever those ways happen to be. In some cases, it's going to be as simple as making sure that people have a strong broadband connection from their home these days. Maybe an additional LED panel light, or a ring light that allows them to feel more confident jumping on a Zoom call, or a little bit of discretionary time in their day if they are reporting into an office or a manufacturing environment, to make sure that they're able to be home, with children who are learning from home. People's needs are as diverse as your workforce is. Getting a sense of what those needs are and how to then meet those needs, in part by helping people understand themselves. And I keep coming back to assessments. It's what I know best. That's part of empowering and equipping people, is to say, let me help you in the work that you do better understand yourself first and foremost, so that you can show up on a daily basis and do your best work.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erich, for the time this afternoon. And I'm curious, where can our listeners find more about you?
Of all platforms, I spend an ungodly amount of time on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is always a great starting point. My company is called Harmony Insights, so there's plenty at harmonyinsights.com. And I also run an HR networking group that you alluded to earlier called HR Hot Seat. And that is at hrhotseat.com. So any one of those three places would be a great start.
Fantastic. And Erich will be joining us for our webinar, which will be on Monday. So if you're listening to this podcast when it drops on Thursday, that following Monday, Erich will be co-leading that webinar with us inside our Talent Optimization Foundation program. And of course, all those webinars are recorded. So if you're listening to this years later, that information is still within that membership group, and you can find that information in our show notes. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us this afternoon, and I hope that you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.